In 2013, 8 co-workers went to sleep in a forest clearing in Oregon. The next morning, 5 tents had collapsed into the earth, and 5 people were gone. 6 years later, geologists found their camp deep underground, but the people weren't there. Just a note that said, "Day 847, we're going deeper." Day 847 meant they'd survived underground for more than 2 years. But here's what made investigators go silent. The handwriting on that note was steady, deliberate, calm. These weren't people trying to escape. They were people who had decided to stay. And the lava tube system they'd entered, it went down for miles with no known end. The trip started like 1,000 other corporate retreats. Portland-based marketing firm Apex Solutions had booked a 3-day wilderness bonding experience in the Willamette National Forest. 8 employees, 3 tents per pair, standard camping gear purchased fresh from REI. The goal was simple: disconnect from screens, reconnect as a team, come back Monday morning refreshed and aligned. The group consisted of mid-level employees, all in their late 20s to early 40s. Sarah Chen, the team lead who organized the trip. Marcus Webb, a graphic designer who'd never camped before. Julia Ramirez and Tom Patterson, the office couple everyone knew about but pretended not to. David Coe, the quiet analyst who always volunteered for extra projects. Megan Torres, recently promoted, eager to prove herself. And finally, James Kellerman and Amanda Price, the 2 veterans who'd been with the company longest. They arrived at the clearing on Thursday afternoon, October 10th. The site wasn't an official campground. Sarah had found it on a hiking forum, described as a hidden gem, a natural meadow ringed by Douglas firs, far from the crowded tourist spot. Remote, but accessible, perfect for what they needed. The first day went exactly as planned. They set up tents in a rough circle, built a fire pit in the center, cooked hot dogs, and told embarrassing work stories. Marcus admitted he was terrified of bears. Everyone laughed. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke. Above them, stars appeared in numbers none of them had seen in years. Friday brought team-building exercises, Trust Falls, a scavenger hunt. Julia twisted her ankle slightly during a hike, but nothing serious. They made it back to camp by late afternoon, tired and sunburned and feeling oddly close in the way that shared discomfort creates. That night, someone suggested ghost stories. James told one about miners who disappeared in Oregon caves in the 1890s. Megan said it was too creepy. They switched to comedy instead, trading impressions of their CEO until the fire died down. By 10 p.m., everyone had retreated to their tent. The forest was absolutely silent. No wind, no animal sounds, just the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing. Sarah woke first on Saturday morning, not to an alarm, but to wrongness. The quality of light filtering through her tent was off, too low, and there was a smell like damp earth and something mineral. She unzipped the tent flap and stepped outside. The clearing was gone, or rather, it had changed. Where 5 tents had stood the night before, there was now a depression in the earth, a crater, and at the bottom, maybe 12 feet down, she could see collapsed nylon and scattered camping gear. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. It looked like someone had taken an ice cream scoop to the ground and removed a perfect circle, 30 feet across. Sarah's tent was one of 3 that remained on solid ground, perched at the edge of the new pit. James and Amanda's tent was beside hers, and about 20 feet away, Tom and Julia's tent sat intact but tilted, half hanging over the edge. But Marcus and David's tent was down there, so was Megan's, and Sarah couldn't see any movement. She started screaming their names. James emerged from his tent, hair wild, face confused. Then he saw what Sarah was seeing, and his expression went blank. Amanda came out seconds later. She took 3 steps toward the pit, stopped, and put both hands over her mouth. Tom crawled out of his tilted tent, careful not to shift his weight too suddenly. Julia followed, limping on her bad ankle. The 5 of them stood at the rim and stared down into the hole. The collapsed tents were completely flat, pressed against the earth like they'd been stomped on by something massive. Marcus, David, Megan, and the 2 tents they'd shared with colleagues whose names Sarah suddenly couldn't remember through the panic. Wait, number. Marcus shared with David. Megan was alone. That meant 5 people total were down there. James was the first to move. He grabbed a rope from his pack and tied it around a tree trunk. Then he rappelled down into the depression, using the kind of careful movements that suggested he actually knew what he was doing. The rest watched from above, silent. James reached the first collapsed tent. It was Marcus and David. He called out their names. No response. He carefully lifted the fabric. Empty. He moved to the second tent. Same thing. Completely flattened. But no one inside. The sleeping bags were still there, neatly zipped up as if the occupants had simply vanished. Sarah felt the ground shift slightly under her feet, just a tiny movement, barely perceptible, but enough to make her step back from the edge. Tom noticed, too. He grabbed Julia and pulled her away from their tilted tent, both of them scrambling toward more stable ground. James climbed back up. His face was pale. He said the words none of them wanted to hear. The tents were empty, but there was a hole at the bottom of the depression, a crack in the earth, maybe 3 feet wide, and he could feel air moving through it, cold air, coming from below. They spent the next hour calling for their missing co-workers. Their voices echoed weirdly in the forest, getting swallowed by the trees. No one answered. Sarah tried her cell phone. No signal, which they'd expected, but now felt like a catastrophic oversight. The nearest ranger station was a 2-hour hike away. They'd driven down a logging road to get here, but the trucks were parked a mile back at the trailhead. Amanda volunteered to hike out for help. James said he'd go with her. That left Sarah, Tom, and Julia at the camp. Before leaving, James made them promise not to go down into the pit, not to do anything stupid. Just wait. Help would come. They left at 8:30 a.m. Sarah, Tom, and Julia waited. They sat on a log, not talking much, listening to the forest. At one point, Tom stood up and walked to the edge of the pit. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted Marcus's name into the crack at the bottom. For just a moment, Sarah thought she heard something, a faint sound, like a voice, but too distant and distorted to make out words. Tom heard it too. He looked back at Sarah with wide eyes. Julia said they should go down there. Sarah said absolutely not. They argued in harsh whispers, as if raising their voices might cause another collapse. In the end, they agreed to wait. Help was coming. By noon, the quality of light in the clearing had changed. Clouds were moving in. Tom mentioned that rain was forecast for tomorrow. Sarah felt a spike of fear. If it rained, if the ground got saturated, would the pit collapse further? Would that crack open wider? At 1 p.m., Julia announced she couldn't just sit there anymore. She was going to climb down and look into the crack. Tom said he'd go with her. Sarah tried to stop them, but Julia's voice went hard. Those were their friends down there, possibly hurt, possibly trapped, and she wasn't going to leave them. So all 3 of them went down. The descent was easier than Sarah expected. The walls of the depression weren't vertical, more like a steep slide. At the bottom, the collapsed tents looked even more disturbing up close, perfectly flattened, as if gravity had increased tenfold just in this spot. The crack in the earth was exactly where James had described. It ran along the lowest point of the depression, a dark, jagged opening. Sarah knelt beside it and shone her phone's flashlight inside. The beam illuminated rough stone walls, volcanic rock, going down at a steep angle. She couldn't see the bottom. Tom called out. His voice disappeared into the crack. They waited 30 seconds, a minute. Then, impossibly, an answer. Faint but distinct. Help. It was Marcus's voice. If you're hooked on stories like this that blend real wilderness terror with unbelievable twists, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Tom didn't hesitate. He squeezed into the crack, using his hands and feet to brace against the walls. Sarah grabbed his jacket. She told him to stop, to wait for rescue, but he shook her off. He said Marcus was alive down there, and he wasn't leaving him. Julia went next, awkward because of her ankle, but determined. Sarah looked back up at the rim of the pit, at the forest beyond, at the sky getting darker with clouds. Then she followed. The crack opened into a lava tube. Sarah had read about these in college geology, ancient underground channels formed by flowing lava that eventually drained away, leaving hollow tunnels. This one was massive, at least 10 feet in diameter, the walls smooth and curved, like the inside of a throat. Their phones provided the only light, 3 weak beams cutting through absolute darkness. The floor sloped downward, gently at first, then steeper. They walked single file, not speaking, every sound magnified. Water dripped somewhere. The air smelled like wet stone and something organic, like mushrooms. After maybe 200 feet, the tube opened into a chamber, and there, in the middle of the space, was a camp. 4 sleeping bags arranged in a square, a small pile of camping gear, a makeshift fire pit made from rock, though no fire burned now, and sitting against the wall, wrapped in a thermal blanket, was Marcus. He looked up when their lights hit him. His face was streaked with dirt and he was shivering, but he was alive. Tom rushed forward and grabbed him. Marcus made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He said he'd thought no one was coming. Sarah asked where the others were. Marcus's expression changed. He pointed deeper into the chamber, where the lava tube continued into darkness. He said they'd gone to find a way out. That was 6 hours ago. They hadn't come back. Julia asked what happened. How did they get down here? Marcus explained as best he could. He'd woken up during the night to a sound like thunder, except it was coming from beneath him. Then the ground gave way. He remembered falling, hitting the slope of the lava tube, sliding down in complete darkness. When he finally stopped, he'd broken his phone in the fall, but could hear the others calling out. They'd found each other by voice, stumbling blind until David managed to get his phone light working. Once they'd gathered in this chamber, they'd tried to climb back up the way they'd fallen, but the slope was too steep, the rock too smooth. David had almost made it halfway before he slipped and fell back down, spraining his wrist. After that, they decided to explore deeper, hoping the lava tube would lead to another exit, maybe to the surface somewhere else. Megan had stayed with Marcus while the other 2 went ahead. But then Megan had said she heard something, a sound like voices, coming from further down the tunnel. She'd told Marcus to wait and went to investigate. That was hours ago. Tom asked if Marcus had tried following them. Marcus gestured to his leg. When he'd fallen, he'd done something to his knee. He could barely walk, so he'd stayed put, hoping they'd come back, hoping someone from above would find him. Sarah made a decision. Tom would stay with Marcus. She and Julia would follow the lava tube, find the others, bring them back. Then they'd figure out how to get everyone to the surface. Help was coming. James and Amanda would bring rangers. They just needed to keep everyone together until then. Julia nodded. Tom started to protest, but Sarah cut him off. She said they didn't have time to argue. She grabbed a spare flashlight from Marcus's gear pile and handed it to Julia. Then they entered the continuation of the tube. This section was narrower. They had to duck in places where the ceiling dipped. The floor was uneven, scattered with loose rocks that clicked and skittered when kicked. Sarah kept her light trained on the ground, watching each step. Behind her, Julia's breathing was loud in the confined space. After maybe 10 minutes, they found the first sign, a protein bar wrapper on the ground. Julia picked it up. It was one of theirs, from the supplies they'd brought. Someone had definitely come this way. The tube began to branch. Side passages split off from the main channel, smaller openings that led into darkness. Sarah felt a creeping dread. If the others had taken one of these branches, they could search for hours and never find them. But then Julia grabbed her arm and pointed. On the wall, scratched into the volcanic rock with something metal, was an arrow pointing forward, and beneath it, in shaky letters, "Keep going." They kept going. The main tube descended at a steeper angle now. Sarah had to brace herself against the walls to avoid sliding. How far down were they? 100 feet below the surface? 200? She'd lost all sense of direction. The air was getting colder and thinner, each breath requiring more effort. They entered another chamber, smaller than the first, And there, in the center, were sleeping bags and gear, but also something else. Clothes laid out to dry on rocks. A makeshift latrine area sectioned off by a tarp. Water bottles refilled from somewhere, lined up along the wall. This wasn't a temporary shelter. This was a camp where someone had been living. Julia's light landed on something that made her stop moving. A calendar scratched into the wall. Tally marks grouped by fives counting days. Sarah counted them. 47 marks. 47 days. But that was impossible. They'd only been in the forest for 2 nights. Then Sarah saw the note. It was pinned under a rock in the center of the chamber, written on the back of a trail map in handwriting she recognized as David's. The message was short. Day 47. Found water source ahead. Going deeper to find exit. If anyone finds this, follow the arrows. We're leaving supplies at each camp. Sarah's mind raced. Day 47. But they'd only collapsed into the earth this morning. Unless they hadn't. Unless time worked differently down here, or unless she was losing her grip on reality. She looked at Julia. Julia looked back, and in her face, Sarah saw the same confusion, the same creeping horror. They kept going because there was nothing else to do. The lava tube system went on, and on. Chamber after chamber, each one set up as a way station. More arrows carved into walls. More notes, counting days. Day 89, day 124, day 203. The handwriting stayed consistent, careful, methodical. These weren't messages from people losing their minds. They were markers from people who'd adapted. In one chamber they found a garden. Mushrooms growing from decomposing organic matter, carefully cultivated in the darkness. In another, a water collection system, dripping condensation from the ceiling into containers. Signs of intelligence, of survival. But no people. Sarah's phone battery was at 15%. Julia's was already dead. They needed to turn back. But Julia wanted to push further, just to the next chamber, just to see. Sarah agreed because the alternative was admitting defeat. The next chamber was the largest yet. The ceiling soared up into darkness beyond their light. And in the center was something that didn't belong. A structure, not natural, built from stacked rocks and pieces of petrified wood mortared together with some kind of clay. It looked ancient, like a shrine or a watchtower with openings that might have been windows. And surrounding it were bones, not human. Animal bones, arranged in careful patterns around the base of the structure. Skulls of what might have been deer or elk, bleached white by time. Smaller bones forming geometric shapes. It looked ritualistic, deliberate. A warning or an offering, Sarah couldn't tell which. Julia said they needed to leave. Now. Sarah agreed. They turned back the way they'd come, walking faster now, not caring about the noise. Sarah's light caught movement in her peripheral vision, something shifting in a side passage, but when she turned, there was nothing. Just shadows and rock and the weight of the earth pressing down. They made it back to Marcus and Tom. Both men were exactly where they'd been left. Marcus asked if they'd found the others. Sarah said no, but they'd found evidence. Lots of evidence. They'd been living down here for months. Tom said that was crazy. Sarah showed him the photo she'd taken of one of the calendar walls, day 203. Tom stared at the image on her phone screen. He didn't say anything. They needed a new plan. Sarah's phone was at 8%. They used Tom's to check the time. It was 3:15 p.m. James and Amanda should have reached the ranger station by now. Help should be coming. They just needed to get back up to the original chamber, to the crack that led to the surface. They helped Marcus to his feet. He leaned heavily on Tom, his injured knee barely supporting his weight. The journey back up the sloped tunnel took twice as long as the descent. Every few feet they had to stop and rest. Sarah kept checking over her shoulder, convinced she'd see figures emerging from the deeper darkness, but the tunnel behind them stayed empty. They reached the crack leading up to the pit. Daylight filtered down, gray and weak. Sarah felt overwhelming relief at seeing the sky, even through that narrow opening. But climbing out was another problem. The crack was steep and smooth, difficult to grip. Tom went first, pulling Marcus up behind him with the rope they'd used earlier. Julia followed. Sarah came last, her arms shaking with exhaustion. They emerged into the pit. The clearing above was darker now, the clouds thick and low. Sarah could smell rain coming. They climbed the sloped walls of the depression and collapsed on solid ground. If you're gripped by this wild turn of events, hit that like button and subscribe for more. The forest was silent, no voices calling out, no sound of approaching helicopters or rescue teams. Sarah checked her phone. 4:30 p.m. James and Amanda had been gone for 8 hours. Something was wrong. Tom said they should hike out themselves, all of them, right now, before dark. But Marcus could barely walk. Julia's ankle had gotten worse with all the climbing, and Sarah felt a bone-deep exhaustion that made even standing seem impossible. They made camp at the edge of the clearing, far from the pit, used the one remaining intact tent, rationed their food because they didn't know how long they'd be waiting. As night fell, they took turns keeping watch, not sleeping, just watching the pit, watching the forest, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Morning came with rain, light, steady, soaking. The pit began to fill with water, a dark pool forming at the bottom. Sarah watched it rise and felt sick. If the others were still down there, in those chambers, would the water reach them? Would they drown in the dark? By noon, there was still no sign of rescue. Tom said they had to make a choice. Either hike out now, all of them, moving as fast as Marcus's injury allowed, or stay and hope help arrived. Sarah looked at the pit, at the rain, at her friends, exhausted and injured and scared. She said they'd wait one more day. If no one came by tomorrow morning, they'd leave. That night, Sarah took the watch from midnight to 3 a.m. She sat outside the tent, wrapped in a damp sleeping bag, staring at the pit. The rain had stopped, but the clouds remained, blocking the stars. Around 2 a.m., she heard something, a sound from the pit, scraping like stone on stone. She stood up, grabbed her flashlight, and walked to the edge. The water at the bottom of the pit was moving, not from rain or wind, but from below, like something was disturbing it. Sarah's light played across the surface. For just a moment, she saw a hand, pale fingers reaching up from the crack, gripping the stone edge. Then they were gone. Sarah screamed. Tom and Julia burst from the tent. She told them what she'd seen. They didn't believe her at first, said she was exhausted, seeing things. But then they all heard it. A voice from the pit, distant and hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Sarah. It was David's voice, calling her name. Tom grabbed the rope. He said he was going down. Sarah tried to stop him, but he pushed past her, rappelling into the darkness. Julia and Sarah watched his light disappear over the edge. They heard splashing. Then Tom's voice, tight with fear. "There's nobody here." He climbed back up. His clothes were soaked, his face pale. He said the crack was filled with water now, completely submerged. There was no way anyone could have called out from down there. No way a hand could have reached up. Sarah didn't sleep the rest of the night. None of them did. Morning arrived gray and cold. Still no rescue. They made the decision to hike out. Marcus insisted he could make it, even if they had to carry him part of the way. They packed what they could, abandoned the rest, and started walking toward the logging road where they'd parked the trucks. The hike took 5 hours. Marcus had to stop every 10 minutes. Julia's ankles swelled until she could barely put weight on it. By the time they reached the vehicles, it was mid-afternoon. The trucks were there, but James and Amanda weren't. Tom found a note under a windshield wiper. It was written on a page torn from a notebook, in handwriting he didn't recognize. The message said, "Took your friends to find help. Wait here. Back soon." They waited in the trucks, heater running, windows fogged. Hours passed. Darkness came. No one returned. Sarah made a decision. She'd drive to the nearest town, find a ranger station, report everything. Tom and Julia would stay with Marcus. She took one of the trucks and headed down the mountain alone. The drive took 90 minutes on winding forest roads. She reached the small town of Oak Ridge just after 10 p.m., found a gas station still open. The clerk directed her to the county sheriff's office. She walked in and told the deputy on duty that people were missing in the Willamette National Forest, that there'd been a collapse, that friends were trapped underground. The deputy listened, took notes, asked for the location. Sarah gave the best direction she could, explained about the logging road, the trailhead, the clearing. The deputy said they'd send a team first thing in the morning. It was too dangerous to go in at night. Sarah asked about James and Amanda. Had anyone reported them? Had they come through asking for help? The deputy checked his logs. No record of anyone matching their description. Sarah felt cold spread through her chest. She drove back to the trucks. Tom and Julia were asleep in the back seat. Marcus was awake, staring out the window. Sarah told him rescue was coming in the morning. He nodded, but didn't look convinced. They spent the night in the vehicles, taking turns sleeping, waiting for dawn. The rescue team arrived at 8 a.m. 3 rangers, a paramedic, and 2 search and rescue specialists with climbing gear. They loaded Marcus into an ambulance, asked Sarah, Tom, and Julia detailed questions about the location. Sarah led them back down the logging road, back to the trailhead, back through the forest. The clearing was gone. Not the pit, not the collapse. The entire clearing. Where open sky and grass had been, there was now unbroken forest. Old growth. Douglas firs, packed tight, with underbrush so thick you couldn't walk through it. Sarah stood at the edge, unable to process what she was seeing. The lead ranger checked his GPS. He said they were at the exact coordinates Sarah had provided. This was the spot, but there was no clearing here, no sign of camping, no pit in the earth. Tom said this was impossible. They'd been here 2 days ago. The ranger gave him a patient look, the kind you'd give someone in shock. He suggested they were disoriented, that maybe the clearing was further in. They spread out and searched. For 3 hours they combed the area. They found nothing. The sheriff's department opened an investigation. Missing persons reports were filed for Marcus Webb's tent mates, David Coe and his partner, Megan Torres, and the tent Sarah couldn't account for. Wait, there were only 5 missing, right? Sarah's memory felt slippery. James and Amanda were also missing now. 7 people total? No, that wasn't right either. The investigation went nowhere. No one matching the descriptions had been seen in Oak Ridge or any surrounding towns. James and Amanda's truck was found abandoned on a Forest Service road 30 miles away, keys still in the ignition. No note, no signs of struggle. Search teams combed the Willamette National Forest for 2 weeks. They found no clearing, no pit, no lava tubes matching Sarah's description. A geologist was brought in to consult. He said yes, there were lava tubes in that region, but the ones they'd mapped were miles away from where Sarah claimed the collapse occurred. If this heart-wrenching journey keeps you on edge, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Eventually, the official conclusion was filed. A group of campers, disoriented and possibly affected by carbon monoxide from a camp stove, had experienced a shared delusion. 2 members had wandered off and died from exposure. The others had survived and created false memories to cope with the trauma. Sarah, Tom, and Julia were sent home. Marcus was treated for his knee injury and a mild concussion. They were advised to seek therapy. Sarah tried to move on. She really did. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. She requested the case files under Freedom of Information laws. Most were heavily redacted, but one document stood out, a report from a spelunker who'd been exploring lava tubes in the Willamette system in 2011, 2 years before their camping trip. The spelunker described finding evidence of occupation deep underground, sleeping platforms, food storage, artifacts that looked modern but couldn't be dated. The report concluded with a recommendation that the deeper tubes be sealed for public safety. The recommendation was never implemented. Sarah reached out to Tom and Julia. Neither would talk to her. Marcus had moved to California and changed his phone number. She was alone with her questions. 6 years passed. Sarah had moved on, or at least convinced herself she had. New job, new city. She didn't think about the forest every day anymore, just most days. And then, in October 2019, she got an email from an address she didn't recognize. Subject line, Willamette Expedition Results. The email was from Dr. Patricia Morse, a geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey. Dr. Morse explained that her team had been conducting a comprehensive mapping project of the lava tube systems in Central Oregon. They'd been using ground-penetrating radar and 3D imaging to chart the underground networks, some of which had never been fully explored. In August, they'd found an anomaly, a massive chamber network that didn't match their existing maps. They'd sent a team down to investigate. What they found, Dr. Morse wrote, was attached as a PDF. She wanted to know if Sarah could identify any of the materials. Sarah's hands shook as she opened the attachment. The first image showed a large underground chamber, professionally lit for the photograph. In the center was a camp, sleeping bags, camping gear, a makeshift kitchen area, water collection system, everything neatly organized, preserved by the stable underground environment. The second image was a close-up of the wall, scratched into the rock, a calendar, days counted in groups of 5. The total was staggering, 847 marks. Day 847. The third image showed a piece of paper protected in a plastic evidence bag. The note read, Day 847, we're going deeper. The handwriting was steady, deliberate, calm. Sarah recognized it immediately. It was David's handwriting. Dr. Morse's email continued. They'd found multiple camps throughout the chamber network, each one further down. Signs of long-term habitation. Evidence that people had lived underground for over 2 years. But no bodies, no remains. Just supplies and notes, marking a path deeper into the earth. The team had followed the trail for 3 days, descending over 1,000 feet below the surface. The lava tubes connected to a larger system, one that stretched for miles. At the deepest point they'd reached, they'd found one final note. It said, Day 921, we found it. That was all. No explanation of what it was. The tunnel continued beyond that point, but the USGS team had to turn back due to equipment limitations and safety concerns. They'd sealed the entrance to prevent civilian access until they could mount a more extensive expedition. Dr. Morse wanted to know, could Sarah identify any of the gear, any of the handwriting? Did she have any information that might help them understand what had happened down there? Sarah replied immediately. She told Dr. Morse everything. About the camping trip, the collapse, the people who vanished, the clearing that disappeared, the investigation that went nowhere. She sent copies of the police reports, the witness statements, everything she'd kept from 2013. Dr. Morse responded within hours. Her email was shorter this time, more cautious. She said the dates didn't align. The camp they'd found, based on carbon dating of organic materials and paper degradation analysis, had been established sometime in the early 2000s, at least a decade before Sarah's camping trip. But the handwriting matched David Coe's employment records. Sarah read that sentence 5 times. David couldn't have written notes in 2003. He would have been 16 years old, still in high school in San Diego. She pulled up his hiring paperwork from Apex Solutions. He'd started in 2009, fresh out of college. Unless he'd been down there before, unless he'd found the tunnels years earlier and somehow made it back to the surface, lived a normal life, then returned when the clearing collapsed in 2013. But that made no sense. None of this made any sense. Dr. Morse included geological data in her follow-up. The deepest chamber showed electromagnetic irregularities, gravitational distortions measuring 0.003% deviation from baseline, small but measurable. Temperature inversions that violated thermodynamic principles. And something else, radiation signatures consistent with naturally occurring radon, but in patterns that suggested concentration rather than dispersion, as if something down there was gathering it, using it. The final attachment made Sarah's blood go cold. It was a photograph of the chamber wall beside the Day 921 note. Carved into the volcanic rock, crude but unmistakable, were words in English. Time moves different here. Don't look for us. We're finally free. Beneath it, 5 names scratched in stone. David Coe, Megan Torres, and 3 others Sarah had forgotten existed until that moment. Marcus Webb's 2 tent mates from that night, the people her mind had somehow erased. Dr. Morse's final message was brief. The expedition is being classified. Please don't share this information. We don't understand what's happening in those chambers, but we believe the tunnels should remain sealed. Some places aren't meant to be mapped. If this journey through survival and mystery captivates you, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Sarah never heard from Dr. Morse again. She tried calling the USGS office. The number was disconnected. She searched for Dr. Patricia Morse online. No results. It was as if the woman had never existed. But Sarah kept the emails, printed them out, stored them in a folder she rarely opened but couldn't bring herself to destroy. In 2023, she drove back to Oregon, found the logging road, hiked to where the clearing should have been. The forest was thick and old and showed no signs of human passage. She stood there for an hour, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of the earth beneath her feet. Somewhere down there, people were living in darkness, or had lived, or were still living in a place where time bent and twisted and refused to follow normal rules. They'd survived for 847 days, then 921, maybe more now, maybe forever. And they'd found something that made them stop trying to escape, something that made them carve We're finally free into stone while standing 1,000 feet underground in absolute darkness. Sarah thinks about that freedom often, wonders what it means to be free from time, from the surface world, from the weight of normal existence. Wonders if David and the others are still down there, still going deeper, still discovering whatever it was that made them stay. The forest keeps its secrets, the earth keeps its people, and somewhere in the unmapped depths the tunnels continue, chamber after chamber, passage after passage, descending into darkness with no known end. We know they went down there, we know they survived, we know they found something, but we'll never know if they found a way back, or if they even wanted to.